Now we've got some interesting people up here. And just 10-second seats, who you are, where you're from.
Hi.
Do the other mics work?
Testing, 1, 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm the microphone tester for the event. No, my name's Chris DiBona. I run open source software programs and public sector engineering at Google.
Hi, my name is Roberto Di Cosmo. I'm a computer science professor here in the University of Paris Diderot and working at INRIA also on new initiative on open source and free software.
My name is Jean-Pierre Barberis. I'm general manager of Bull.
That's very quick. Nicely done. Actually, starting with Chris and going back to Silicon Valley, besides having the great weather over there, you have a large number of companies doing open source and large number of companies doing open innovation as well. In your view, how can these actually learn from each other?
How can these which learn from each other?
How can open source, open innovation learn from each other?
Well, they just do all the time. I mean, so the reason why open source works and why I've always been drawn to it is the lack of friction and adoption, you know? So someone mentioned licenses. I don't remember who. I'm sorry. I think it's you. And the thing about these licenses that's very, very important that people really never internalize is that they don't stand in your way. They exist to say, yeah, take the code, use it. Here, a couple of conditions, but go for it. Anyone who's ever had to cut an intellectual property deal, the previous speaker mentioned this, realizes that's a 3 to 6 month long process, sometimes even longer when you're cutting it with universities. So when you have standards for sharing information, for sharing code, for sharing innovation, as it were, you reduce a lot of the barriers to further innovation. And that's a huge thing that has nothing to do with Silicon Valley, but it has everything to do with people saying, wait, I can just use this stuff. I can start from this point instead of having to do all this crazy lawyer work, or worse, rebuilding operating systems and compilers and tools and libraries.
So you're saying that open innovation companies could learn on building the frameworks, process, and so forth from open source? But
sure.
To some extent, when I come from the open innovation world, I kind of see the process and setup you have being quite rigid. How do you avoid that? And that's also what we heard. They had all those processes and services, but now they cut it off. He said they don't use them anymore. How do we avoid that? Perhaps some of you have input on that as well.
Well, maybe I'm not going to answer directly your question, but talking about something similar. And there is a big difference I see. You have mentioned it in your slides between what I see in open source and what I see in some use of open innovation today. So if you're a company with a problem, you call for 10,000 people to think about your problem, find a solution, then you give them some nice T-shirt or maybe a little check to say thank you. That's very usable for the company, but how is it useful for the 90,000 other people who actually worked on the problem and didn't find the solution you actually chose? Well, if you look at what happens in open source and in free software in particular, I mean, this is a matter of communities. We are communities, in general, at the beginning, technical communities, code communities. Look at Debian, for example. Maybe Stefano, raise your hand. You have people from Debian here, many others. I mean, Debian is a duocracy. It's a place where people actually work together by doing, and decisions are taken by people who are able to do, and they share code, they share common goals, and do things they actually need. So if you have a large community, maybe once the solution comes from me, another time from Chris, etc., but we all benefit from it. And this is something that I don't yet see in the open innovation world. I mean, how we all benefit by this organization.
Okay, but then the question is that in our email correspondence before here, Roberto, you kind of said that open source is facing some big challenges as it becomes more mainstream. And also my question to you guys, I mean, open source, is it okay for the community to actually go in a situation where not everyone benefits, where some benefit more than others? How religious are you about matters like this in your community?
Okay. Maybe we are not absolutely religious for that. Okay, we are very, very pragmatic. I'll give you an example.
Is this the business person speaking now?
Yes.
So.
I'll give you an example. We decided to build up the Terra 100 computer. It was something like breaking the wall. Okay, 1 teraflop. Nobody has done that in the past. If you're speaking about energy, 5 megawatts. It's 140,000 Intel cores. Okay. So you're dealing with numbers difficult to manage, okay? So what I agree first is that you're looking first for building blocks. You cannot reinvent the wheel. It's impossible. you have not enough time to do so. So you need to have ideas in the box. And somehow, I say that you can find ideas in the box from open source community. Therefore, you have another thing, is to bring new ideas, breaking ones. And also, I say to fork, coming from these first layers, and to add new ideas and to enhance these ideas with new ones and with the capability of managing large numbers, for instance. So it's absolutely not religious. We are looking for technology, we say first.
What about you, Chris? You have some different perspectives, different hats on here, trying to do more open source as well and not just bring in money for Google. What's your view on this one? Is the open source community ready for even more business focus? Is it going to be a good thing?
So in my experience, I mean, if business people get too close to engineers who don't want them there, the engineers just stop replying. They just kick them off their mailing list, and it's not a problem. I mean, you know, one of the challenges that we had is as we were trying to figure out how we could help out in open source, the first thing we did was we released software. We released code, because that's the coin of the realm, right? And then we were like, well, what can we do to actually leverage money to help open source? And that's how we came up with the Summer of Code, to create new developers and all the rest. One of the things I've realized over the last 10 years is when you try to fund open source development, it can be very, very difficult to turn money into code, right? So, you know, there's all these questions about equity, about not equity in terms of shares and stock, but equity in terms of, well, why is this person paid and this one not being paid? And you don't want to poison a community by trying to imply value judgments outside of it, right? So we went the other way, and we said, well, let's just try to create new developers where there are none. And if it's a student program, people are way more tolerant because students have to get through school. We're helping them with money, and it helps out open source. So, you know, other than that, some directed funding happens, but it's very rare.
Okay. Let me try to go to another thing, which going back to you, Roberto. I mean, because you did tell me that you strongly believe that open source will face its biggest challenge ever when going mainstream. What did you mean by that?
Well, actually, many of us have been in the free software open source community for, say, 20 years maybe, and it is more or less 10 years that it has gone mainstream, and maybe it is 8 years or 5 years that you can see an audience like this one with nice suites and necklace, okay, attending a conference on open source. So the world is changing, okay, and open source is going mainstream. I see a big challenge coming on different areas. One challenge is how do we incorporate into the free software or open source community people who come from outside and has different values, which are not used to this way of doing collaboration, okay? Understanding how to be part of an ecosystem which is not just I make more money, okay, and do collaborate. If I can comment on what Chris said, maybe what Google could do is just instead of releasing code, just have more people collaborating in open source software openly. Okay, one of the criticisms was once that you did a lot of development internally. Then sometimes you release the code, but you don't follow the process of collaborating with the community, and that's very important. And this is also happening in different industries. They have to learn how to collaborate with communities which can be outside their own business. We are used to do this in the open source community. The newcomers need to learn how to do this properly. And so this brings me to the other issue. So this is a big challenge, and it is a cultural challenge. Then we have a technological, scientific challenge, which is with so many people coming, developing code, writing code, having new wonderful solutions for solving this or that problem. We have gazillions of lines of code lying around, millions of projects evolving all the time in a parallel distributed way. How do we control this? Not controlling in the sense of a big brother, controlling in the sense, how do we foster evolution, accompany the quality of what we are doing? This is definitely not easy. We need science, we need new tools, and there are people working on how to master in this kind of complexity. And on the other side, we need to teach our engineers, the new engineers, our students, how to work with this kind of complexity, how to work with the code communities, how to work with users which are no longer coders.
Yeah.
Sorry, too long.
Too long. But just getting back to a cultural thing, we got some global people here. What is the influx, or at least your company, two global companies, and I imagine in your research you have global views as well. But just looking at the rollout side, I mean, we don't have any Asians here at all. As a quick take a quick look. But when you look at the impact on the cultural things that comes from China, India, and Brazil, is that going to have any impact on open source? When Roberto talks about it's about aligning values and newcomers should align to these values, do we have some interesting things coming along for us?
Yes, we have an interesting experience through OW2. So we decided as a strategic move to open this open source community to the Chinese. Okay? And we established contact with the Beijing University, with the guys at the Institute of Technology. It was very amazing at the very start because they didn't understand at all what it was. Okay, I mean, discussing with institutions, academic institutions in China. They're very good salesmen, very good engineers, but they are not accustomed at all to that. And we can have something for free. We can have a base code. They use Linux in Northern Moods, but being a part of the community is something quite strange at the very first. Okay, and now I think that they've understood what they can expect and what they can bring. And I think we are really strong and marvelous idea that will come from this.
So you see they kind of understand it and they're learning. Do you agree, Chris? Do you have any perspective on that? Chinese are understanding open source, open innovation?
They're coming along. I mean, what's really sort of been very difficult to overcome is the division between sort of the Western programmer and the Chinese and Japanese subcultures of programmers. Yeah. So if for instance, if you go to Japan, it's extremely it's a very advanced open source community there, but they don't talk much with people outside of there, whether it's because of language or cultural differences. I don't know why, but it's taken a lot of effort on the part of a lot of different teams to reach out into those areas. Okay. China, though, it's been a little slower to develop than say Japan or India or the rest. So, and I think that has more to do with, again, cultural isolation more than anything else. So.
Just to add on that, I'm coming from an open innovation perspective.
And maybe a bit of racism, I mean, on the
what?
Maybe a bit of racism, like innate in the programmer. I don't mean that in a horrible way. It's just that a lot of software development's been in English. It's been in Western language, UTF-8 languages, non-ideographic fonts, and that has a natural push away to our friends in the East, which is really a shame. So
let me build on that, because that's my point about P&G, and they learned that they actually set up the P&G site in English, and they've really had a hard time understanding, even though they make a marketing presence and push for this in China, they didn't get any responses. And then they made a Chinese version of it, and it just started pouring in. So I really think the language barrier is something we need to address. So we're going to do a thing here right now. We have time for one more question or a thing that we can look into, and you can decide on either this, if you have any great input on it, either what have brought you out of your comfort zone, if you can share something on that, and a key lesson on that. Over the time you worked with open source, open innovation, what really freaked you out and got you out of your comfort zone? And what advice can you give to others based on that? And while you think a little bit about that, I think we'll have time for just two questions. And the gentleman, yeah, do you mind just coming up here?
Thank you.
Just quick.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my name is Klaus. I co-founded Hypius. Yeah, and I wanted to talk to Stephen because we do the same thing in France and with some twists, but now I'm going to pose a different question that concerns more open innovation, open source. Because actually there's no point in pretending that it's all the same. Yeah, sure. The question is coming, but I need to introduce it anyway. There's no point in pretending it's the same. One essential difference, and I'm very sensitive to that point Roberto made, like we're going to do a competition, we give away a T-shirt or an iPod, and we hope that people will give us their ideas, and then we'll make a lot of money without investing anything. Obviously, in open source, you have the community feedback. You get something from what you do, but that's why open innovation has also to pay. You have to compensate what's not coming out of the community. You compensate it with payment, and I think that's very. It has to be very clear. I think it's a wrong, like this idea of saying people are motivated by the problem. Sure, but it's like somehow cheating on them as well. That was the question. I mean, no, that was the point.
Okay, more common, and I fully agree that you need to find different ways to actually compensate people.
Well, wait a second.
I would
People
just
talk
say,
about compensation all the
thing, Chris.
time.
In open innovation, lots of people do not get compensated on how they contribute, or not fair enough, and that's still a problem in open innovation. Do you have a comment further? And thanks, Klaus-Peter.
It's easy to get lost in compensation and consider money and credit and T-shirts and iPods and all that crap. And what's worth pointing out is that over the last 20 plus years, a lot of people have managed to do this without those structures in place. And so the question might become, and maybe this is where people go out of their comfort zone, is understanding why people are motivated by things other than the money and by the corporate success and the business success that so many people are used to being motivated by. So, what drives an academic to release a piece of source code? Or what even drives a company to do it when it's clearly not part of, say, some platform play?
So right. It sounds like the intersection of...
no one asks a mathematician, why did you tell that guy about your equation? Nobody asks, a doctor, why did you tell somebody to move the vein to the left so you could get to the artery, right?
So on that intersection...
Is it a science, or does it always have to be about compensation?
What's your key advice to people then, having spent so much time on that intersection?
Well, I mean, honestly, I would say it's like, money pays the rent, money's important, jobs are important, but in my experience, if you're a talented developer who has some level of contribution into open source, getting a job is not hard. Getting a job doing open source is not hard. So what I would say is if you're driven by computer science, if you're driven by the concerns of making society better through computer science and treating it that way, that you're not going to have any problem at all. If you're looking to leverage open source, well, that's a different discussion, right? If you want to leverage open source for innovation, whatever you want to say. If you're looking just to make some coin off it, there's nothing wrong with that. But you shouldn't question where things come from. Through the frankly kind of myopic view of business, when you can look at them through the grander vision that some of these projects were started under and why they persist.
So don't question it because both
No, you can question it,
valid.
but I mean, it's just make sure that you don't try to force it into a model of challenge grants and the incentive model, which is a very strong one for what it does. But you know what I'm saying?
What I kind of hear saying is also referring to something I read about Bull, and that's coming that some of the things they came back to me is that the future is blended, and I think we cannot have it in black and white anymore. But Jean-Pierre, do you have any out of the comfort zone?
My recommendation or advice is quite simple. When we are dealing with very pragmatic goals like achieving a system or delivery service with a service level agreement, you need either to embark some new technologies and ideas and things like that, and to enhance code dealing with billions of transactions has nothing to see with small code. But at the end of the day, you must have a tight control of all that. It is very difficult because you have a lot of innovation, a lot of possibilities, a lot of forks, okay? And in all these forks, all this innovation, you have also bad codes, bad ideas, and things like that. So the key thing for us is to stay with a vision, okay, and to keep the goal aligned to that. And I think it's really key when building up some code base.
So I kind of agree that you need a vision. Or actually, I fully agree on the vision part, but I would perhaps disagree on how tight a control you should have. Because as Steve Jean-Pierre said, the changes outside are much faster than what you see internally.
Tight control does not mean you do not accept innovation. But when you have a time scale, you cannot embark any, for instance, new ideas, new codes, you cannot allow in the time scales. That's the okay. You must, there is a trade-off for that.
There's definitely a trade-off there, yeah. Roberto, any comments on this?
Well, you asked the question, which is, what did bring me out of my comfort zone? Well, what a kind of a question to ask to an Italian living in France, married to an Argentinian, and teaching computer science. I think I'm all the time out of my comfort zone, anyway. But if I have to pick one, well, actually, I was somebody doing Greek and Latin, etc., and then I got caught in this terrible thing which is computer science. I could not get rid of it. It is kind of a drug, you know? It's fantastic. And I became a computer scientist. And then I discovered open source and free software, which was fantastic. And then I discovered engineers working in computer science and doing this kind of thing, which is not exactly the same way we do things in computer science, okay? So we don't have the same view. We don't speak the same language all the time. And then I had to meet a lot of people doing business using open source or free software, and this was definitely something strange for me. So since I need to go back to my comfort zone, it is for my own safety, I'm trying to put these three communities together. Okay? I want to bring them to work together, to share goals, to share problems, to solve new issues. And this is I have spent quite a lot of the last 3 years building something which is called IRILL, I-R-I-L-L. It is an initiative to put together researchers, engineers, communities, companies to work on the challenges of open source or free software. You would say of open innovation also, because I really like the idea of an ecosystem. It is not easy to be part of it. So we are starting to do this, and maybe I will get back to my comfort zone. That are my words today.
I think we can all agree that it might not be pleasant being outside the comfort zone when you're at it, but the learning you can extract for it is quite relevant. Roberto, I think you should go and get your presentation ready. And meanwhile, do you have any conclusive remarks you'd like to come into? If not, then I'll just have time for one question only.
Yeah, no, I'd rather see a question.
Okay. Could we just one question? If any?
Anyone?